Welcome back to Facebook Live. Every Friday at this time, we try to have a 5-minute discussion about a couple topics. Today's topics, we're talking about 5 things to prevent injury and help improve performance. So obviously there's a lot of different things that you can do, and one thing that people often get wrapped up in is trying to do too much, or often being so overwhelmed that they don't know where to start, and so they don't really get going on things. So I would say the 5 top things that you could do are self-tissue mobilization. We'll talk about these a little bit more in depth here in a minute, but self-tissue mobilization to keep your tissues healthy and then being ready for activity. Working on your mobility, especially in specific joints. Working on stability, which is often forgotten by most people. They spend time stretching, but they don't spend time working on stabilizing their joints or their bodies. Making sure that you get adequate recovery. And finally, taking a look at your functional movements or your biomechanics. And we'll talk about each of these 5 categories kind of briefly today in upcoming talks over the next several months. Stay tuned because we'll break each of these out a little bit more in depth and you'll see some more information. So let's start right away with self-tissue mobilization. Self-tissue mobilization involves using foam rollers, lacrosse balls, therapy balls, balls that are specific to tissue work, anything like that, where you're getting into the tissues and you're increasing pliability of the tissues, you're improving blood flow, and you're making sure that those tissues are ready for activity, but it can also help with recovery. So I usually recommend using some form of self-tissue mobilization. The type is going to depend on you, your activity, and what the demands on your body are going to be, but using some form of self-tissue mobilization prior to exercise and then again after exercise. It's a great way to warm up the tissues, but then also cool them down. Think of it a little bit as kind of a search and destroy mission. You don't want anything to be terribly painful, but you do want to work tissues that you find that are a little uncomfortable, they're a little sore when you're digging in with those tools. Those are probably tissues that you need a little bit more focus on. So you want to find the tissues that are a little bit more sore, keep it in a tolerable level, and work them over. Usually about 3 to 5 minutes pre and post activity is a great way to go. If it's a day off, you can also use that as a good way to get your tissues moving. So we'll get into some more specifics in future posts. When it comes to mobility, mobility is what we describe as having adequate movement at each joint or each specific tissue. And when we look at this, some joints in your body inherently have more mobility and some joints have less. So when you think about the shoulder has a lot of motion as it moves through its range. That is a more unstable joint. It has a lot of mobility. So for most people and most athletes, we don't want to increase mobility at an inherently unstable joint. On the flip-flop, my hip tends to be a little bit more rigid. It's not as mobile. Yes, some people can move through a wide range of motion, but for most people, they end up with a lot of restrictions in their hip joints. So hip mobility might be something that we want to work a little bit harder on. As a general rule, as you go through your body, every joint in your body skips back and forth from mobile to stable. So if we take our spine, your neck is really mobile, so it's less stable. Your thoracic spine is really stable, but less mobile. Here we have mobility, but less stability. And then as we go down to the bottom, we have a lot of rigidity, less mobility. So it alternates at each level. So when you think about mobility and stability, which are kind of our next 2 on the list, you want to try to balance things out. If you're hypermobile or you have too much mobility, you need to work on developing stability and vice versa. So if that makes sense, you really want to try to work on balancing, especially as the joints alternate throughout your body, and working on appropriate musculature and appropriate joint mobility, but also stability, and finding a balance between the two. When we take a look at number 4 is recovery. A lot of people don't put much stock into this, or they kind of don't know where to start again. Recovery is an umbrella term that really covers a lot of factors. When we look at recovery, we want to talk about, are you getting enough sleep? Are you getting good nutrition so that your tissues have the proteins, nutrients, the fats, the enzymes that they need to be able to repair themselves after a lot of activity? So nutrition is a big piece. Are you staying hydrated? Hydration is going to help you kind of flush out the tissues and recover your tissues. What are you doing on your off days? You should be doing some form of active recovery so that your tissues are not taking a lot of load. They're not being put through a really heavy workout if you're training for a marathon, because we're coming into marathon season, or Ironman. We have Ironman coming up in a few weeks. You need to make sure that recovery is an important piece of your plan and that you're booking it in with adequate factors to make sure that your body has what it needs to do the repair jobs that it needs. finally, we want to take a look at biomechanics. A lot of people over the course of their life have developed compensations, and the number one risk of injury anywhere in your body is a previous injury somewhere in your body. So it doesn't matter if you had a previous ankle sprain or a previous shoulder injury. Sometimes that can put you at risk for injuries elsewhere in your body. Sometimes it doesn't. It depends on what the load on your body is and what compensations you develop following those injuries. So taking a look at your biomechanics, making sure that you have proper running form if you're running. If you're a basketball player, what do your knees do when you jump and you rebound? If you're a football player and you're taking hits, do you have appropriate shoulder stability to be able to block or catch or do different positions? So taking a look at those biomechanics is not only important for injury prevention, but it's incredibly important to give you efficiency of movement to improve your performance. So for more information on these 5, stay tuned in future posts over the next several months. As always, send us your questions, your comments, or concerns so that we can bring those up. We do have a week coming up where we do just Q&A, and we'd love to see you again. Join us every Friday. Thanks.